Media marketing. My name is Matt. I'm from Ottawa, so we'll go a little more into detail. The one thing I found so far is that there aren't any sort of review forms or anything like that, but I'd really like to know what you guys all think about this. And since it is a talk on social media marketing, I encourage everybody to tweet or Facebook or whatever you want to do. Just try to use this hashtag here, but just make it easier to track things a little later. So just to make sure you're the right crowd too, this talk is basically for anyone looking to use social media marketing in their studio, their company, if you're a freelance student, whatever you want to do. But the talk is mostly positioned towards smaller studios, and that's just because that's where a lot of my experience is in. It's for people as well who have at least an introductory knowledge of social media platforms, so Twitter, Facebook, if you have one of those, and I'm guessing you do. It helps to know a little bit about it. And really it's for anyone working in any role in their studio or their company, just because I really think that social media should be used by everyone. So the couple of different takeaways. Want everybody to gain a better understanding of how to use social media marketing and how to apply it within their activities. How social media marketing needs to fit into your business plan. And this goes as much for, again, individuals as smaller studios as larger studios, really anybody. And at the same time, I'll be trying to give a few best practices on how to use it and maybe inspire you to use it in your own way. So a little agenda, because there is going to be a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to move quickly through it all. I'm going to start off with an introduction, go through a little bit of environment analysis, compare social media marketing to traditional marketing, go through something what I call the three big ones, or the big three. And a couple of best practices associated with those, cover data analytics real quickly, and then just wrap it all up. So a little bit about me, because I think everyone should always know something about the speaker, otherwise it's just this kind of disconnect. I've been at Snowden for about a year. We'll cover that a little bit later. I'm Canadian. I lived in Germany for a year, so that's sort of where a lot of my love lays, as well as in Europe. And I'm currently playing Black Ops, Forza 3, Mortal Kombat, some other ones too, but those are probably the big three ones, so if anybody wants to chat about that later, that's cool. About Snowden Studios, because I'm sure not that many people have heard of us, we're a smaller studio. We're in Ottawa, Ontario, so not the biggest gaming community either, but slowly coming together. We've been around for just over a year now, celebrated our first year in February. $500,000 of revenue in the first year, so we've grown very quickly as well. And a lot of that's because of social media marketing. So we provide programming support, full title development, mostly on downloadable titles to a couple of companies you see there. So we'll start off, as I said, just as an analysis of the environment today, how it looks, how the market looks, some of the different problems we have. So the biggest one that I like to cover is always communication. And this is a nice little graph that I put together to explain that. So, in my opinion, and how I see the market here, you have a lot of mainstream publishers, developers, the big ones, the ones that everybody knows, the ones that everyone probably has a game in their library from. You have a lot of the indie developers, the guys who make some pretty sweet games, creative stuff, usually appealing for niche markets, which is your next little one down. And then you have the mainstream games, which is just pretty much everybody who plays games. But the problem I have is that generally the mainstream devs and the indie devs don't talk to each other a lot. There's a flow of communication of the mainstreams really dictating, well not dictating, but deciding more about what the smaller studios should do to be successful on a bigger scale. And then all the other arrows pretty much explain what the rest of the communication is. Another big challenge I see is noise. And this is not just with the game industry, but this is with any industry. There's too many brands, there's too many people, everyone's trying to fight for your attention, and as a result, very few messages actually come through to the end user. So hopefully we'll be able to cover this, and just keep in mind how social media will help with that. Another big one is fragmentation. So there's tons of devs, there's tons of companies, there's tons of small studios. Yours is that little red dot in the middle. So you've got to try to find a way to differentiate yourself more than just through having a red house, let's say. And then another big one is consumer power. So these are the people who are buying your games. These are the people that ultimately you want to be fans of your company. But the average person spends about $137 a year on games. So it's really not a lot. When you break it down, $40 a game. It's only about 3.5 games a year. So there's this huge issue of you trying to get your game into those 3.5. And the question becomes, how do you overcome all these challenges, all these issues? But before we go through that, I'm going to just cover traditional and social media marketing so everyone has an idea of what the difference is between the two, and maybe a little bit about how that'll answer a lot of those challenges. So with traditional marketing, this is what everyone's pretty much accustomed to: TV ads, radio ads, print ads, stuff like that. It's really focused on quantity, so get as many out as you can for as cheap as possible, and hopefully we'll see a return. It's a model that worked really well in the 50s, right after the Second World War, but it's now you're seeing it work even less. It's based on pushing messages out, and it creates this real separation between companies and individuals where there's this us versus them. With inbound marketing, which will include social media marketing, there's a huge focus on quality of the relationship of the communication with you and your audience. It's a lot of pull-based communication, so you're trying to get people to come talk to you instead of the other way around. And it's focused on integrating your audience with what you're doing. And so that's a big part of what we're going to cover. A little interesting fact, too, is that the average lead cost, whether this be B2C, so to consumers, or B2B, to businesses, the average cost of getting a lead or a customer is about $332 with traditional marketing. With inbound marketing, which includes social, it's only about $134. So for those of you who like numbers, this is great justification on why to use one over the other. With traditional marketing, and this is just a comparison of on a larger scale, so not only including games, but including all kinds of companies that use it, there's a huge difference in average revenue. And that's, again, likely caused by a lot of the interactivity that comes with social media marketing. Your ROI, which is what I know all the financial people, all the accountants in here are really worried about, because social media traditionally has been very hard to justify in terms of ROI, return on investment. More than twice as high. And the average likelihood of people in general to allocate more budget to it is obviously much higher in social media versus direct mail, which is a traditional marketing method, and this is the highest likelihood to increase budget allocation. So all this to say that traditional marketing essentially is dying off, and if you're trying to use it as a main part of your marketing strategy, you may want to reconsider. A couple of different facts as to where that's all going. So this kind of begs the question of why more companies aren't using it, when really all the data shows that they should. One big one is fear. People are generally afraid of it. And that's because it's unfamiliar, and a lot of people are actually concerned about losing control. You throw your brand out into this cloud of people, and fundamentally you're expected to lose a lot of control over that brand. Uncertainty. So again, ROI hasn't quite been proven yet, as it has with impression-based or quantity-based marketing. And the track record, again, goes along with this, that there's too few success stories of people really using social media well to grow their companies. But, as I just showed you, there's a lot of support for it. And this is fundamentally because people like to share things. And it seems that people who are using traditional marketing don't quite realize this, is that people like to share what they're doing, their interests, their values, and irrelevant information. And when you look at it, there's a social media platform for everything and pretty much everywhere in between. There's a whole bunch that I haven't mentioned of. And this is all because it's a psychological effect. People like instant gratification. They like knowing that they can talk as quickly as possible, they can get what they want as quickly as possible. So this is, sort of quote to describe that as why I send fan mail to a company when I can tweet at them and they can tweet back at me and we can engage in conversation. There's a sense of belonging, of community, and this comes back to if you're trying to build people to work with you, with your company. People are saying, I can talk to a company like I do with my friends. I can give them my idea and then say, hey, my idea made it into their game. That's kind of cool. And again, all of this creates two-way conversation. So the company cares about what you have to say, you can talk to them, and it's sort of this two-way conversation as opposed to pushing, you think what we want you to think, and that's it. And what you have to do is you have to leverage all of that psychology into the context of your company, your studio. So if you can get people excited to take advantage of any of those benefits in the context of your game, your studio, yourself, whatever, you're obviously going to be able to leverage that really well. And so this comes down to three keys of marketing that I traditionally looked at, but that are changing, and we'll cover how they're changing in just a second. So the first one is that you need to know your target market and your audience. So you need to know who you're trying to deliver your message to. You need to know what action you want them to take, And you need to give them a good reason to take that action. And if you're missing any one of these in any sort of marketing, generally you're not going to get anywhere because someone else is going to be doing this process right, and your audience is going to fly right by what you're trying to say. And so this evolved, like I was just saying, into social media marketing. So you have to be consistent with everything that you're doing. Because there's so much noise, there's so many people out there. If you're not consistent, you're not going to get your point across. And you need to be relevant. People need to be interested in what you're having to say. And you equally have to be interested in what other people have to say. And you also have to be personal. And this is a fundamental issue, I think, in crossing the barrier from traditional to social, is that a lot of people still look at it as the company is talking to people, whereas you really have to look at it as you are talking to people. You are engaging your audience. And equally, those people are talking to you. They're not just your audience, they're people. So all that with an example. Of a little campaign that I saw going on called Ask JJB. This is with IDOS in Montreal. So it's a periodic podcast they had going on by their art director. And this is all in the context of Deus Ex 3, so a new game they're working on to be released a little later this year. They answered users' questions, fans' questions through their Facebook and Twitter page. So people go on there and ask a question, JJB would make a podcast about that question afterwards. Obviously didn't answer everything, but answered a couple of interesting ones. And as the last point shows, it included some weird content sometimes, like funny hats and cows, and just, you have to see it to understand. So why did this work? Well, it was consistent. They did it pretty much about every week. And every week someone got their question answered, so people kept tweeting and asking questions to try to be that one person. It was relevant because it talked about a project that they were working on at the time and a project that was gaining a lot of buzz. And again, the personality factor was that it was the art director himself that was answering these questions to the fans. So we're going to move on to what I was calling earlier as the big three. So these are the big three platforms that I think everybody should be using, and a couple of best practices to use them. So the big three, as you might have imagined, are Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. The reason you should be using them is because A, they each offer a unique benefit. So Twitter's great for news posting, sharing info-based conversation, mostly with opinions, things like that. Facebook is great for personal context, so people talk to you like they would their friends, like I was talking about earlier. And Facebook is also really good for sharing content. We'll cover that in a second. And LinkedIn is something you need to be using if you're doing any sort of B2B marketing. You're trying to talk to other people because it integrates everything into a professional context more than it does a personal context. They each specialize, as you would imagine, in different applications. So Twitter is really great if you're trying to do PR, customer relationship management, outbound marketing, trying to send things out to people. Facebook is really good if you're looking to do word of mouth marketing, opinion leadership, things like that. And as I was just saying, viral marketing is huge on Facebook. LinkedIn, again, B2B marketing, market research is very good as well. But again, all in that professional context. They're also some of the biggest, without mentioning things like YouTube, but everything considered, they're some of the biggest. So Twitter's over 200 million. Facebook's over 600 million active, and that's a really important thing to note, is that it's active users. These are people that I believe are using it at least once a month. And then LinkedIn is 100 million smaller, but still pretty significant. And this is a really interesting graph. It's showing where the average age of the users are on each of those networks. So as you can see, Twitter's really good for that younger crowd. Everyone pretty much under 44 is you're going to get the majority of people on Twitter. Facebook is pretty well spread out over the big key ones. And LinkedIn is mostly an older crowd, as you can imagine, of a professional social network. And the one big demographic that I highlighted there was the 35 to 44 age range. And that's because this is where you're going to get most of the people actually buying your game. According to the ESA, this is where the biggest amount of purchasers, of gamers, of people that you're trying to get to are. And between the three of them, you can cover them pretty quickly. In a B2C, Twitter, Facebook, you can have really good success there. And a lot of you are probably wondering, what about all the other platforms that are out there? Because I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of them. But I think it really comes down to, you need to know what the needs of your studio are, because not everybody needs to use every single platform. If you have strong media, you're going to have a lot more success on things like YouTube if you have a lot of cool videos to show. If your needs are more business development and networking, things like that, Zing, Academy are really good sources for that. Viral distributional one with Facebook. Dig, Delicious, StumbleUpon are good resources. And if you're looking to connect on a personal level, maybe share some blogs and diaries and dev stuff. WordPress, obviously, Tumblr, Blogspot, other good resources. So now that we know why you should be using these networks, let's look at how to use them. So let's start off with Twitter. As I said earlier, the applications are pretty much in public relations, brand visibility, outbound marketing, stuff like that. A couple of bonus features you get from using Twitter is that you can include photos, videos, you can deep link between pages so users are linking to other users, trending with hashtags, things like that. And the biggest reason that you should be using Twitter is if you're looking to, again, spread opinions, spread thoughts about products or services. This is a graph just showing, actually the first one should be learn about products or services, but these are the biggest reasons that people use Twitter, according to a couple of recent studies. So if what you're trying to do can fit into any of these categories, this is a big reason to be using it. A couple of best practices. You should always be posting engaging and relevant retweetable content, and there's a certain format for this. But the reason being is that once you post something, you have about 5 minutes before it just disappears into this massive feed of Twitter posts. Particularly when there's big world events going on, or big product launches, things like that, your tweets can get lost really, really quickly if people are following a lot of people. And they're definitely not going to spread unless what you're trying to explain is retweetable, so people can share it with their friends. Use the @ symbols, hashtags wherever possible, just because it increases your likelihood to get seen by other people or start conversation with other people. And don't just post news. Always try to start a conversation with whoever it is you're talking about, because if you're posting news, this defeats the purpose of having, again, two-way conversation I was talking about before. So an example, this one's kind of interesting because it's actually a good example of how not to use Twitter. For anyone who was following Uncharted 2 when it was being developed at first, you'll understand why in a second. So what Naughty Dog and SCA did with Uncharted was they integrated it as an option into the menu so that you can tweet about your progress in the game, what you're doing in the game, share it with all your friends. And it was likely implemented, I would think, to spread noise about the game through the hashtag and to reward people that are doing gameplay, much in the same way achievements do. But it was ultimately removed because of feedback, really just because it didn't work out too well. And the reason being is that it broke those 3 rules that I was talking about. It wasn't really, it was consistent, but it was just too consistent. People's feeds were just flooded with their friends with Uncharted 2 tags every time they would beat a level. It wasn't really relevant because it was shallow, unengaging. A lot of the tweets were just such and such unlocked such and such a chapter. And it's not likely something that you're going to share with your friends unless you're in deep competition, but it's not going to make its way very far out. And it lacked personality because they were always in the same format, they were very frequent, and they just appeared as spam. So cover Twitter, let's cover Facebook. As I was saying earlier, biggest applications, word of mouth influence, viral marketing, anything that you want to do that's media, you're going to have a lot of success using Facebook. A couple of bonus features is that it's really evolved to a point where you can create second web pages with Facebook. You can do games, apps, whatever you want to integrate into your page, your studio, yourself. Again, you can do it. And it's really the best platform for sharing. So people are most likely to share stuff on Facebook rather than through any of these other platforms. And it's actually almost up to 25% of people share it through Facebook before they do anything else. And a couple of best practices is always post in the morning or in the evening, so before or after the workday, generally because people know by now that they shouldn't be on Facebook at work. But if they are, you'll still see some stragglers during the day. And always try to make a call to action. Try to get people involved in what you're doing and try to get them to have that conversation again. Try to engage them. So if you can add something like click here or tell us what you think, or you're asking people to get involved, that's going to work really well. And include media or links to media wherever possible, because this is what's most likely to get shared. People are really interested in sharing photos, videos, things like that, more so than they are what your company thinks, let's say. And an example to back that one up is Guitar Hero. Despite the fact that it's on hiatus now, or whatever the case may be, it's still one of the biggest Facebook pages for a game. So they're up around 4 million users right now, and they grow 13% every month. So massive growth, despite the fact that there hasn't been any major release anytime lately. And the average for pages at all on Facebook is only about 4%. So to be going from 4 million and then growing 13%, this is really something to be inspired by. And it's because the page is really mostly driven by user-generated content or media sharing. So again, it's answering those things that Facebook does best. So again, how does it fit into the 3 rules? It's consistent because there's about 10 posts a week, and they're rarely normal posts, as I would call them. So they're rarely just text. We always have some sort of media involved or linking involved or something that gets people engaged. It's relevant because they're always music related. So even if it's just a music video of something that, a song that was in a game, or going with a season or a holiday or something like that, it's always relevant, and it's always something that people are going to share. And when you trace it back to the source, it's going to bring you to the Guitar Hero page. And things like VIP photos, people love to see celebrities on the internet. So. And best of all, it has personality. So the calls to action really make the page relatable to people. It feels like they're talking to people more than they are just this random company. And it includes links to the people actually posting on there, so you know who you're talking to. You're not just talking to Guitar Hero, you're talking to, I forget who, I think it's Jeff and something else. Okay, so last one, the big 3 is LinkedIn. And this is really for anyone who's looking to do B2B marketing, so you're looking to talk to other businesses, or you're looking to talk to decision makers in businesses, you need to be using LinkedIn. Networking, again, is a great reason to use it. I just think it is a giant electronic Rolodex, and it works for that really well. And a couple of bonus features is that it is very info-rich. On your company page, you can add a lot more information for free than you can with other pages. So you can add testimonials from clients, you can add a couple of different apps in there as well. It's pretty interesting. And the network itself has a couple of cool things like pages, questions and answers, groups, just other ways for you to get involved. And a couple of quick stats. This is really what makes LinkedIn so good, is that 50% of the users are in some way, shape, or form decision makers in their company. So whether this is an HR rep, whether this is the person that's going to be purchasing your software, your hardware, whatever the case may be, you have about a 1 in 2 chance of talking to someone who can influence that decision. 41% of people who use LinkedIn have gained some sort of business or results by using it. And again, 100 million people, half of those are worldwide, half of those are in North America. So if you're looking to do any international marketing, especially B2B, this is a really good place to do it. So a couple of best practices. Don't try to connect with absolutely everybody on LinkedIn. Just because you see them on there doesn't mean you should connect with them, because numbers are really not that useful on LinkedIn. Sure, you have a lot of connections. You're going to be able to see a lot of other people's connections and make your way across the network, but if you don't know those people, it's really not doing you any good. And likewise, don't try to be anonymous. So you have an option of actually sharing your information if you're looking at someone else's profile. Don't try to stay anonymous, because you're just not linking people back to you, back to your page, back to your brand. Try to nurture relationships. So if you can stay in touch with people on LinkedIn, however the case may be, even if you're starting in LinkedIn and you're making your way to Twitter or Facebook, whatever you can, try to nurture things and try to stay in touch. And last, get involved. So if you can post answers, if you follow questions and you want to show yourself off as an expert in a certain topic, do it. Because again, you're just generating more visibility, and you're getting people engaged in the context of what you're trying to do. Join groups, add applications wherever you can, because again, you're just increasing the likelihood of someone else being interested in what you have to say. And just to reinforce all that, nice little chart showing where the average customer acquisition rates are through the 3 big platforms I just talked about. In the B2B context, obviously, LinkedIn showing really high. B2C, Facebook is just almost off my chart here, and Twitter's pretty equal. So to wrap everything up about what we just talked about, this is a really good way to show where you're going to gain the most customers in whatever context it may be. So just going to cover data and analytics. moving a little quickly here, so I'll try to slow down for you guys. This is what I think is really important, and that at first I wasn't going to include, but then you'll see in a minute why it's so relevant and so important to be doing. And really it comes down to the fact that you have to keep track of what you're doing. Because if you're spending time, you're spending money, you're spending any sort of currency, let's say, in any type of marketing, and this is going to come from higher up, is that you need to know what you're generating out of it. If you don't know, or if you're really not generating anything out of it, you're wasting your time. Very bluntly, you're wasting your time marketing. So you need to measure what you're doing, and you need to act accordingly. So if a certain campaign you're doing, or if you're on Facebook or whatever the case may be, and what you're doing is just not effective, it's not generating any sort of returns, or it's not fitting into what your goals are, then you need to change that. You need to look at how you can do that more appropriately. And the unfortunate part is that a lot of people talk follower counts. So we have, going back to Guitar Hero, you have 400 million followers. It's kind of nice, but if you're not doing anything with that, it's useless. And this is what actually a lot of social media freelancers will try to pitch to you, is that, oh, okay, well, we'll increase your follower count by 100 people a week. And if those 100 people are bots or just people who aren't engaged with what you're doing, they're not following those 3 rules that I was talking about earlier, you might as well not have them, because again, you're going to be wasting your time trying to connect with them. And this comes back to a couple of different things about those 3 big platforms I was talking about. Twitter generally has a really high spam rate. And this is because you can talk to anybody, you can add anybody, you can hashtag anything, and there's really low barriers to communication. So that's both a good and a bad thing. I mean, there's a lot of times where I've found business actually on Twitter just because I've gotten to know somebody who I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to know at a conference or a group meeting or anything like that. But at the same time, I get a lot of ads posted to me for various inappropriate things that just don't work very well for business. Facebook, again, is absolutely useless if your fans don't share your content. You can have 100 million fans, but if none of them are linking people back to your page, if none of them are trying to get involved with what you're doing, it's useless. And I think Farmville is a great example of this, unfortunately, is if you have a lot of people using it and you have a lot of links linking back to your game, it's cool, but it hits a certain point where it just gets annoying and people sort of tune it out, and again, it falls into all that noise that I was talking about earlier. So if your fans aren't really getting engaged and sharing that content in meaningful ways, it's useless. And LinkedIn is also, unfortunately, useless if you don't know most of your contacts. So I could have every single one of you right now on my LinkedIn profile, but truth be told, I don't know what most of you do. Actually, that's a good time just to check who all is actually like a business person here. Show of hands. It's kind of interesting. And who all is actually involved in the creative side of their studio in any way? Okay. So the nice thing is that actually all of you should be using this, and I'm glad to see that it's a nice little combination of people, because if I had all business people, they'd be trying to share this content back to their creative team, and it's not going to work out too well. So again, it's just useless if you don't know everybody, if you don't know your contacts, you don't have meaningful relationships with them. So all that being said, I have a lot of negative points for follower counts, but just to give you a couple of examples of more meaningful ways you can measure your campaigns, depending on your marketing goals. So if your goal is to drive website traffic, try to get people coming into your page and to see your content, into seeing what you're doing, a good metric to follow is your click-through rate. And a lot of analytics software that's included in social networks will give you an idea of this. But you can also embed it with things like Google Analytics on Facebook, using Facebook markup language and some interesting things. And click-through, by the way, is just how many people are clicking your link and going to your site. That's what I'm referring to here. If you're looking to increase influence and visibility and try to get your product out there, or try to get, even if you're a student and you're trying to get your name out there, your indie game out there, and you're trying to get people to notice you, a good metric to look at is your cloud score, mentions, how often you're getting talked about. So again, retweets, shares, you can measure all these things, and they're great indicators of how far your content's getting. If you're looking to increase your user engagement, so if you get people more involved, try to crowdsource maybe. I mean, that's a pretty big one if you're looking to build a game and you're looking for feedback, especially in Facebook gaming, with a lot of people are doing an agile development and you're trying to get your product out there as quickly as possible and then build it from there. A really good metric to follow is the amount of time people are spending on your site, your page. If they're bouncing, where are they going afterwards? Are they going to another network to share it? Are they going somewhere else within your page? Where are they going? What are they doing? Excuse me. If you're looking to drive sales, and this is whether you're doing B2C, B2B, a really good metric to look at is always your conversion rates. So out of the amount of followers you have, or out of the amount of people that you've had look at your page in the last month, how many of them are actually coming back and buying your product? And if you use that in combination with all the other ones that are mentioned on here, it can give you a good idea as to why your sales may or may not be working, why your conversion rate is low, and what you could do maybe to increase it. And a really nice way to take care of all of these things is with a couple of different social media management tools. So Hootsuite is actually my favorite, made right here in Vancouver. There's a couple of different ones too, and they all offer different ways to approach it. But essentially what all these programs do is they link all your networks together. They give you one common place to manage everything, to see where you're being mentioned, how you're being mentioned, and a lot of them actually offer analytics as well. So there's some other platforms. These are some of the bigger ones that I see posted most often. We use Hootsuite. It's got a nice little free analytics package included with it. So like I said, I moved through that presentation pretty quickly, but we'll wrap things up, and this will actually give us a nice little bit of time to, yes?
Can you go back just one slide?
Yeah, sure.
Can you explain just what each one of those do? Or?
Yeah, well, essentially they do a lot of the same things. They consolidate all your social media networks and platforms into one place. So, yeah. So they allow you to see where you're being mentioned, how you're being mentioned, and basically just wrap up all the posts into one place. So, cool. So, again, just a recap. All right. So the biggest thing I think is that you need to be aware. You need to market those conditions that we were talking about at the beginning. So you need to know what you're jumping into, and you need to know how that's changing, if it's changing, and how you can adapt to it. You need to always remember the three keys of social media marketing as well. So you need to be consistent, relevant, and be personal. If you don't achieve any of those things, likely you're not going to be as effective. And these all sort of tie into the three marketing goals I was talking about earlier. So you need to know your audience. You need to know what action you want them to take, and you need to give them good reason to take that action. And if you're following these three keys, you're very likely to do that. And last, you need to measure your efforts and you need to act accordingly. Because again, if you don't know where you're going with your efforts, you're wasting your time. You might as well not be doing it. So the question becomes, how are you going to reach your audience? How are you going to connect? Because if you don't, somebody else will. Especially in the world of business, it means that somebody else is getting money that you could be getting instead. And that's where your audience goes. So that's the end of the presentation. Like I said, it actually wrapped up pretty quickly, so we'll have a nice amount of time for questions. So, yeah, questions? Yes?
If you look at your slide, it was pretty early on. You went through it pretty quick, but it had some percentages between the difference between traditional marketing and
yeah.
I'd love to just see those numbers.
Yeah, no worries. Going with the TV and the iPhone, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's guy right there.
Very nice.
Yeah. So just to explain a little further, this is a little study that was done just to see where people are going to be spending marketing money or allocating budgets. And a lot of people were said to increase it in social media marketing, and this is presumably because of the return that they're getting on it or the increase in conversion rate sales. Versus traditional marketing, this is just a couple of different methods that I was talking about earlier, and how you can see that they're just not going to be growing as quickly. Yes?
What was your most successful campaign, and why did you think it was successful?
Most successful one we did with the company was actually not quite a campaign, but it was more lead generation. So this is actually how we started working with IDOS. was they were posting all over the place. Well, a lot of their higher up people, so their general managers, some of their dev directors, were posting that they needed a lot of programmers. And as I was mentioning, what Snowden does is we do a lot of programming support for other companies. So the way it worked out was they were posting all over the place. We decided to see who we knew at IDOS and how we can get connected and try to get involved and try to help them out with programming support. It turns out our president actually knew their technical director and pretty much fired off a couple of emails. A few days later, we were already in talks with them to start a contract, and yeah, about 3-day turnaround time actually. More recently too, we've had people tweet at us for proposals and things like that. And there's a couple of projects maybe that are going to be starting a little later in the summer that I can't quite talk about yet, but yeah, pretty interesting.
Can you make this deck available?
Actually, from what I understand, they will be available. I'll make it available on my LinkedIn page as well. So if you guys want to come find me on there, you can check it out. Yes?
Can you give any insight into best practices of using the hashtag in terms of creating a hashtag or jumping onto someone else's hashtag from the perspective of we've got a game and we'd like to use that mechanism to tap into a group or to grow a discussion?
Sure. Well, Twitter's really good for the fact that it gives you a list of all the trending hashtags right now, either worldwide or by country or whatever market it is that you want to go after. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Don't use it too much and don't use it too little. Try to get it always, again, relevant. So if you want to, let's say Charlie Sheen is trending, the winning hashtag, which actually the American Red Cross did a really good job of this. But they used it at a time where it was relevant, it was trending, and they can get people involved back to their cause, let's say. But if you're using too many hashtags, you're using irrelevant hashtags, you're wasting your time, you're not going anywhere because you're not following what I was referring to as the 3 rules. So let's say you have a game coming out, if you've got some creative marketing people who can somehow find a way to relate it back to something that's trending, all more power to you, let's say.
So you find the trending hashtag and then you make your statement and link it into that. So if it was using winning, then
sure.
For example, hey, our game is about to be winning, and then that's something that will show up when people are out looking.
Exactly, and I mean, it's not that you're going to necessarily generate huge amounts of people saying, oh, I saw that company's posted a hashtag, but you're more likely to get people to come back to you. They're more likely to get random people who would not otherwise find you because they're following that trend at the time.
And what about creating a hashtag for your game? Is that the sort of thing that you should be putting into all of your tweets so that then it's being collected, or is that part of not overusing it?
Well, actually, that's an interesting one. I would say if you're going to be doing any sort of marketing, obviously you can sort of consolidate everything and see where all your tweets or all your content is by following that one hashtag. So for yourself, for example, with this presentation, I'm definitely going to hop on Google later and see if anybody actually tweeted about this, because I'll be able to search by that hashtag. So it's the same thing if you're making a game or you're trying to spread it out there. You can easily see all in one place where that hashtag is. People are more likely to reuse it if they're going to talk to you, so you're just more likely to generate more noise. Maybe not get it to trend, but definitely consolidate everything and get it all in one place. Yes?
When you mentioned click-through servicing,
Sure.
What's your opinion on utilizing services like TinyURL, Bitly, that sort of thing, where it gives you the monitoring versus setting up your own short URL service that's more branded to your site or to your domain? Or
Again, it's sort of a double-edged sword, because if you're you get a great advantage of having analytics if you're using things like Bitly, but you have a much stronger marketing and branding if you're using your own. So I think it comes down to which one is going to be more relevant to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make it seem a little more exclusive or try to get recognition with your own personalized one, then that's really good. Especially if you're using it on a platform that already offers a lot of really good analytics. Like if you're using any one of the social media managers, they're already offering you a lot of the information on click-through rates, where they're coming from, things like that. So again, that's the sort of scenario where you can use either one. Cool. Yes?
I'm coming at it from perhaps a different perspective from many people in the room. I'm actually a freelance writer, so not a developer or a business person. What would you say are the pros and the cons of a development studio hiring someone sort of specially to manage the social media marketing? Because on the one hand, obviously, having the devs and stuff do it themselves saves a lot of money, but on the other hand, you might want someone who is a writer or can communicate and has that background. So what's your opinion on that?
I'm going to say it varies. I hate to sound vague with that, but it's kind of true. One stat that I didn't include in here is that most companies only find themselves using or managing their social media for about 6 hours a week. So it's very minimal input required. In terms of the quality that you're going to get out of it, I think there's something to be said about having the relatability and the personal touch of having the devs do it, for example. I wish more people in my studio did it. I'm trying to get them on the bandwagon, but it's a little difficult. For example, when we make a breakthrough or technological thing, I mean, a lot of the value that comes from it is from talking to that specific person rather than your PR manager, essentially. There's a lot of arguments against hiring a specific person to do it as well, just because you're essentially paying a person to be on there all day, and unless you have something to manage or your social media marketing is really that important to you, you could be spending that money a little better, in my opinion.
Well, it's I guess a follow-up question. What about as opposed to hiring someone full-time, hiring someone freelance to say, okay, I just need you to do, see the 6 hours a week, I just need you to do that, and I'll pay you for that, and that's it.
Coming back to what I was saying earlier, is I think it's very difficult to find the right person to do that. Because a lot of them are very good at growing follower counts, but not a lot of them are very good at engaging people in what you're doing. And that's something that I think you're going to have better success if you're doing yourself. And especially if you have any size team, really, whether you're 1 or 2 people working on a social game or you're a company of thousands, if you have lots of people doing little amounts here and there, it's going to add up to a lot more than having even one person doing it on their own 6 times a week, especially someone who's not directly involved in the process. Cool. Well, like I said, that wrapped up a little early, so thanks for coming, guys.